Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Becker's Dental and DSO virtual event. I'm Alan Condon, editor here at Becker's, a moderator for this panel. The next 5 years of DSO consolidation, competition, challenges, and more. Over the past couple of decades, we've seen a significant shift as DSOs have grown more in prominence, reshaping how dental care is provided, managed, and indeed experienced. I think it's fair to say this trend presents both opportunities and challenges. Consolidation has the potential to drive innovation and efficiencies and expand access to care, but it does raise important questions about competition, the future of independent practices, workforce dynamics, and the patient experience as well. So with this in mind, I'm joined by two dental leaders to discuss the state of the DSO field today, and what to expect over the next 5 years. So before we dive into this discussion and get the ball rolling, I'd love to hand it over to each of you to hear a little bit more about your roles and your backgrounds. Weston, I'd love for you to kick us off.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, Alan, thank you for having us here. I know we were expecting a couple others, but it looks like Robert and I are going to get a lot of time to kind of hash it out. So I'm excited to do that. I am the CEO of SPP Dental Partners. We are a dental partnership group started in Southern California. SPP stands for Saving Private Practice. And so our vision initially as practitioners, as we saw colleagues kind of joining other groups around us and DSOs, we kind of thought that we wanted to really define for ourselves what group dentistry would look like. And so we kind of started putting that together and bringing in, partners to kind of work with us to be able to help us grow that outside of it. So we have other partners that help us grow SPP. But I'm also a practicing dentist every day, at least 4 days a week. Friday is my heavy hit SPP day, and then every time in between patients. So I'm wearing a few hats right now. But it's awesome to see SPP grow, and we currently have 15 locations between California, Washington, Utah, Nevada, and Idaho.
Fantastic. Thank you, Weston. And Bob, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Nice to be here. Nice to be here with Weston as well. We are part of Qualitas Dental Partners. It's a private, discreet partnership organization similar to what Weston is doing out on the West Coast. We were founded by dentists, and we operated for dentists. We are in Southern New England predominantly, and we're multi-specialty. So we have all different types of specialties with us, including a lot of general practices too.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bob, Weston. We've got some questions here. I'm excited to dive into this discussion. But before I do, I think Weston and Bob, both of you referred to your organizations as dental partnership organizations over dental service organizations. Just curious to hear from each of you a little bit more about why that branding, that title matters. Weston, Bob, care to kind of give us a little more insight into the reason behind that?
Yeah, I'll go first. Partly because, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later in the discussion, but as the DSO industry has grown, there's probably enough colleagues of mine and other people out there that may know somebody that hasn't had a great experience with a DSO. So there's a lot of good things that DSOs can bring to the industry for sure, and we'll talk about what some of those are. But there's also big challenges, and some of that coming from a dentist standpoint, where when you join a group, one of your biggest things you're concerned about is loss of autonomy and some of those things. And so DPG or DPO, I feel like DPO was really one of the first alternative names out there, dental partnership organization. And then we've kind of taken it that extra step to call ourselves a dental partnership group, because it really is so heavily focused on the partnership aspect as opposed to acquiring their businesses. And so we want to differentiate ourselves. Yeah, we play with some of the same, levers and tools that DSOs can use to help grow and scale. But oftentimes we really do want to differentiate ourselves from the style of DSOs that tend to be traditional and that others have had bad experiences with.
Right. I would echo what Weston just said. The dentists who founded our organization had kind of the same experience, where they were being approached by a variety of different corporate dentistry type models. They didn't like any of them, not only from kind of the invasiveness of which they come in and try to run the practices, but also the kind of misalignment of interests that go on in terms of economics. So what we try to do is we try to come up with a kind of the perfect kind of symbiosis between what the clinicians do really, really well and what companies can do very well because they can bring people who are focused on it 24/7, really as arms and legs or resources to those practices. So you let the clinicians continue to do and own the apparatus, but at the end of the day, there's people behind the scenes who are helping them on critical things like recruiting, which is, fundamental in the world today because there's a limited amount of providers and clinicians in front office. There's a war for talent going on out there. And to have people doing it 24/7 is very, very helpful for the industry. So that's kind of how we formed. And we had done a lot of listening early on. And I think, Weston put his finger on it. The indications from a lot of the providers, particularly those who had, sold to DSOs, was relatively negative, right? And so we were kind of formed at the end of the day to kind of be something different, to be a game changer, so to speak, a different way, a different model. We think ultimately this kind of partnership model is the way forward for dentistry, kind of bring the best of both sides.
Yeah, certainly helpful to understand as we dig our teeth into this discussion and how your two organizations are quite similar in that regard as well. So please forgive me if I say DSO in some of my questions is more of a broad term as we kind of dive into the conversation. But Weston, I'd love to kick things off with you. I think interesting topic as we get the ball rolling here. I think no secret to either of you or our audience members, anyone in dentistry, the rapid consolidation we've seen for quite some time. When you're looking ahead, next 2, 3, 5 years or so, how do you see the trend of consolidation evolving, changing in the DSO industry? What are you paying most attention to?
Well, first of all, definitely that feeling, and I don't know if Robert feels the same way, but everybody feels like it's going to be really bullish going forward about the growth of group dentistry and consolidation in general, for sure. We'll often talk with partners about like what's happening, just to kind of put numbers to what they're feeling or seeing in their areas. We reference a report from the ADA in 2019, just before COVID. 183 practices in the country, and that at least 100,000 of those would probably change hands over this next decade from 2020 to 2030, right? And that number is actually, they estimated to probably hit that number more closer to like 2026, 2027. So that definitely escalated in terms of speed up. And almost half of those are said to have been, that transaction between the practice and whether it's another dentist or a group, and that more than half of those are happening between a dentist and a group in some form, right? And so that's happening right now. And hopefully, I see what we're paying a lot attention to, right? Like potential interest rates coming down. There is a lot of money on the sidelines that have been kind of waiting to be deployed from whether it's private equity, other groups holding on to some of that money, ready to invest more and more soon. So just a ton of that is waiting to go. And it feels like the last year or two, a lot of focus has been on, driving up the quality of their companies, and working on providing, like having good value within the group and a little bit of M&A. And now it feels like everybody's just like, okay, enough's enough. Let's go. Let's start acquiring, what we would say, partnering with more and more practices. So we expect a significant increase in what people thought years ago was like a steady increase to probably speed up pretty quick over the next few years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, quite a startling figure there in terms of that ADA report you'd mentioned as well, in terms of, I believe, 100,000 practices anticipated to change hands by 2030. That's down to about 2026, 2027. Bob, are you aligned with Weston in your thinking here, or how are you thinking about the future in terms of consolidation?
Yeah, it's all the stats are there. The demographics are there, right? So you have, particularly where we're located, the average age of the dental practitioner is in one of our states, it's over 60, and a couple of other states, it's kind of late 50s. So the clock's running out on a lot of people. So they're naturally going to have to transition at some point, and how do you get there? I would agree with Weston too. I think you're going to see more and more practices try to figure out how they do that, and maybe they want to join a group. I think the model or the old model, like with my dad's day, because he was an oral surgeon, they used to have associates and they would pass it on to an associate and the associate would buy in. You see obviously less and less of that today because number one, it's really expensive to go to dental school. And if you're any type of specialist now, you're coming out with a lot of debt. And that's really hard to buy in at those levels. Two, there seems to be a little bit of reluctance on the part of dentists coming out of school now to really kind of take the mantle and run with it and running these individual practices. Whether they're being taught that, whether it's just a new generation, or whether they actually see how difficult it is to run a private practice with higher costs that are going on, not only the inflation and supply costs, but also the wage inflation that's going on out there, and the regulatory burden that's coming on. We'll talk about this later, but the regulatory burden that's going to continue to come down in the industry is going to raise costs as well. So we think the demographics are favorable to consider continued consolidation. We do think it has to change a little bit from the past. Around 2021, 22, you had a lot of irrational exuberance going on in terms of acquiring, that bigger was necessarily better. Well, as we got to 23 and 24, it wasn't. A lot of those models, did not perform very well. There was a lot of equity destruction in those models because there wasn't consolidation of the enterprise. There wasn't industrial logic to what they were putting together. And so as interest rates went up, as providers came up with their contracts and didn't come back to work the same way they worked previously, those over-leveraged models began to crack, and we could see the destruction of value. So we firmly believe that the successful, partnership model of the future is also going to be one who diligences practices very well, understands how that new practice fits in strategically into what they're doing. And ultimately, it's better for patients, it's better for the providers, and it's better for the teams that are, taking care of those patients. So, yeah, we're cautiously optimistic, but we're striking a cautionary tale to everyone. Just don't commit the same errors you did in 21 and 22, because investors out there are watching, right? And so I think dentistry has an opportunity here to a second bite at the apple, so to speak, but to do this section much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting thoughts, especially the cautionary tale of is bigger always better. I'm curious, Weston, if you have any thoughts to build on that before we dive into our next question. A lot of interesting thoughts raised by Bob there.
100% agree, right? Like, as we talk to people in the industry that would be potential future partners with us, financial partners with us, it's so much more about like, what can you do to support dentists so that dentists are going to be successful? Like, what is it that make you unique as a group, as opposed to, oh, how much EBITDA have you guys accumulated, right? And that's what it was 3 years ago. It's just amass EBITDA and go to market, right? And they got wise because a lot failed under that particular model. And so you really do have to support dentists and patients in a good way that's sustainable. And if you can't do that, and a lot of that means that you have to start consolidating the group to do things alike so that you can get scale and work efficiently. If you can't do that, then you struggle, right? And you have to have operator buy-in, meaning the actual dentists have to be aligned financially, motivationally. They have to be a part of that now. Whereas before, if you just sold out early and now you were kind of a work back for a few years, once that work back's over, it's like, what is my incentive to keep working as an employee for this group? And that's, I think, where you're going to see so many more of these hybrid style groups now, partnership style groups, because dentists want to be involved in that, especially if they're a younger dentist that wants to go for a while. Like, hey, I'm entrepreneurial. I see where the market's going, and I want to be involved in that. But I still have to be the guy or girl that's doing the dentistry all the time. That's one of the biggest challenges for DSOs too. If you don't have buy-in from your operators long term, then you're going to constantly, sift through associates, and that's a struggle. That leads to less quality dentistry.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Wes, a quick follow-up on that. I wonder if you could just give us a little bit more insight into how the value prop has changed for your organization now to dentists specifically. As you're both mentioning, generational differences in dentists, a little bit more entrepreneurial. How has the value prop changed when you're looking to partner with some of these new dentists?
Are you saying in terms of like what we're proposing to them and what by them staying on or be involved in that their opportunity to take advantage of that value?
I guess what are they seeking out or craving maybe in partnerships with organizations like yours, as opposed to maybe dentists from the previous generation, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
great question. And a lot of that is generational, right? So we'll have some older doctors that are a little bit closer that are eyeing the exit and thinking, hey, can I get more value than just selling to this? And in the meantime, while I'm trying to do this transition, I'd love some support. I just don't want to figure this out on my own and hope that my associate can take this over. It takes a little bit of that pressure off for somebody that's a little closer to retirement, knowing that we're as invested as they are in making sure that that transition happens successfully, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got a good amount of our doctors that are, my age. I'm 43. I got plenty of time left to practice. I've been doing this for almost 15 years, kind of know how to run my business as far as a small business goes. And I'm seeing that, hey, I could take advantage of scale, things that by outsourcing certain things that don't need to be done by my team members in my practice, they could be done outside the practice so that all we focus on is good patient care, right? That's all my front team is focused on, my assistants, billing, a lot of the HR, marketing, some of that stuff. It's outside of my practice. I'm involved in it, but it's not happened by the team that I pay hourly or salary to, right? And so being able to export that, focus on this, and then because of the arbitrage or the value of a group, they get to participate as we grow as well. So that's the number one thing I always tell partners that join with us is more than anything, we want to support you in everything, but the value of the practice that you're participating in is going to grow significantly, and you're aligned with us to do it along the way, not just up front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, fascinating to kind of get your perspectives there. And Bob, while we're on that topic, I saw you kind of nodding in relation to a lot of Weston's comments there. I'd love to get your insight too, in terms of you thinking the same way at your organization, or any other insights to share there too.
Yeah, so it's that, the dentist owner is very entrepreneurial, right? And so you try to maintain some alignment there so that they are, after they join you, they're so as excited to run their business as they were previously, and they are. I think one of the bigger challenges that you have is as you transition these owners, as they transition themselves over time, who's the next generation coming in? What does that look like, and what are their motivations, right? They didn't start their practice, right? They didn't have the same challenges, the same stresses as somebody did who started their practice from scratch. What does that look like? So they don't have that memory of what it took to kind of grow a practice, and everyone who joins us as a practice owner, they have that. They get up every day thinking the same way they did before they joined us. They think the same way afterwards. So we're spending a lot of time figuring out, how does the new provider who comes in, how do you align their interests? How do you get them excited? How do you get them to think like equity, or how do you get them to think like a business owner? And this is just not dentistry. You see this in every type of service business. So whether it's accountancy or lawyers or consultants, you have to kind of reinvigorate the next group coming in, so that you have that kind of continuity, the continuity of care, the continuity of the business, the continuity of the cash flows, which really accretes the value. So our model really is, and I'm sure Weston's very similar to this, is you need to have some ownership in the hands of the new providers coming in, or at least the opportunity to kind of earn that ownership, so they're aligned. You have to kind of career path them so that they understand, as they continue to grow in the organization, that there are better opportunities if they choose to go after them. And I do think many times we misinterpret what the associates really do want, right? So you really do have to do a lot of listening and sitting down with your associates as the time changes, so you understand where they would like to go. We talk a lot about hopes, dreams, and desires here, right? Not only for people joining us, but also for their practices, but also who join us as associates. What are you hoping for? What are you dreaming for? What are your desires? And then we try to career path around that. So I think it's a unique challenge in this space, but it's one we've got to continue to figure out, because the associate today, the graduate today, is the practice leader of tomorrow, right? And the older dentists, that demographics are going to play, and they're going to leave the industry.
Bob, that's obviously one unique challenge of today. It kind of ties nicely into the next question I wanted to pose to you both. But I guess the unique challenges that DSOs or dental partnership groups face as they continue to grow and consolidate practices, that's obviously one that's top of mind for both of you. What are the other unique challenges that you have top of mind as you continue to grow?
I think as you scale, and this has happened in a lot of different sectors of the economy that begin to consolidate, so you can go back in time and look at a lot of them, is that does the talent keep up with the larger size of the operations that are being created, right? So, and that goes not just from a dentist perspective, that goes through the clinical staff, that goes into the front office staff. So is the person who's running a 3-chair operation today the same person who can run a 25-chair operation or an 18-chair operation? And generally it's not. So it does become, and there's not people out there who have done it. So we're kind of in uncharted territory when it comes to, you think about how do you scale with the people. So you're going to have to make the investment. That's what we're spending a lot of time on, is making the investment in people so that they know and they can grow and run these kind of larger organizations. And large organization doesn't necessarily always mean the physical plant and more chairs in the same space. But as these networks get bigger, you got to know how to start working through all of that to deliver for your patients. If that's one of the value plays, is that a patient who comes into your network is getting really good care, whether at office A or office B, then there has to be kind of an alignment of model, and people have to know how to mobilize that. So it has to be this training and development, because it just doesn't exist today, because dentistry hasn't gone through this before, like other industries that have consolidated. So for me, as I think about continuing to scale, it is, do I have the resources? Are they available? Or do we have to train them?
Weston, I assume you have a unique line of sight into this as well. Obviously, as a practicing dentist and as CEO of your organization, I'd love to get your perspective in terms of some of those unique challenges you're looking at as you're looking to get ahead of as you continue to scale as well.
Yeah, Robert hit it on the head earlier in what he said here, which was, like, I call it Gen 2, right? The next generation of doctor, right? So all of these groups make deals or partnerships with Gen 1 doctors, right? Like the doctor who currently owns it. If you're not currently planning for and effectively working towards what does Gen 2 look like, the whole thing starts to fold in on itself, because the incentives have hopefully been aligned properly with Gen 1 doctor, who is the current leader of the practice, has probably developed the culture of that practice, right? And just knows the town, knows everything, and is the one with the deal with the group, right? And then you've got a future associate or somebody that's going to eventually take over or step in and help to, well, grow the practice, because all of us want to scale our practice. And the definition of scale would be like, hey, can I grow my business so it's not so reliant on me personally, right? That's all of our partners' goals, is like, hey, I want to continue to be a dentist, but that pressure to be the #1 producer is just hard too. So how can we help our practices scale and then prepare ourselves for Gen 2? And it means investing in training. It means investing in recruiting, like early on, and kind of always being aware of like, hey, just because you say you're not ready for an associate now doesn't mean we shouldn't be preparing ourselves to what your practice is going to look like in the next year, 2 or 3, when you could potentially be doing that. And then most importantly, leverage us as a group to help you prepare for that, right? Because if you were doing that by yourself, again, just another pressure I got to be thinking about while I'm also trying to sell dentistry, do quality dentistry, and all that stuff. So that's where I think it's both a challenge, and I'm sure that every successful group is thinking about that and planning for that, because I kind of felt long when I first started, is like, it almost felt like there was a bomb about to explode in about 10 years, where all of the Gen 1 docs for all the traditional DSOs were gone. What would be left, right? When you start to imagine that. And then you start to see over the last few years, groups getting smarter about preparing for that, because that's the only way you're going to be able to continue this value, because somebody comes in and invests in your group, whether it's private equity, and they are going to want their investment, or to significantly increase. And the only way you do that is long-term continuity, right? So you got to plan for that. That's definitely one of the unique challenges. The other, and we kind of already mentioned this, is the fact that I think DSOs have a bad name for the most part. It doesn't mean all DSOs are bad. It's just that when you start to say DSO, immediately somebody has a bad experience, or somebody knew somebody with a bad experience. And I think over the next couple of years, as we get again more of these hybrid partnership style groups out there, where its incentives are more aligned together, people will start to have better experiences. And I think that you're going to see. I've seen traditional DSOs merge with hybrid style groups, so you can kind of offer both going forward, right? Because not every single dentist is alike, right? Not every single dentist needs the buyout up front and then maybe participate a little bit on the back end. Some would rather participate on the long run and then have a buyout on the back end. So you're going to see all these different models. It's good for competition. It's good to have those different opportunities, because again, and Robert could probably say the same thing, I mean, with all the discussions you have with dentists, there is no dentist alike, it feels like. Everybody's got a little different something going on. Some have 5 kids, some want to fly planes, and one person's just trying to like go to Cois and be a better dentist, and everybody's a little different, and you kind of got to be prepared for all of it.
Bob, a lot to unpack, a lot of interesting insights from Weston there. I did saw you nod your head. I just wanted to bring you in before you jump into our next questions there. Anything to add, or anything you'd like to build on?
Oh, I think Weston got it. I think he got it absolutely right. It is the successful model that is going to be able to make that transition. And so transitioning practices successfully is huge for value. It's huge for patients, right? So there's so many secondary and tertiary markets that are out there that are underserved, and providers aren't going there, right? So there's, with that whole urbanization that has gone on over the last 30 years, where more and more people have gravitated towards the bigger cities, same for dentists. And so it's harder today to incentivize a dentist to come out of the big cities and go to some of the smaller cities, or go to some of the towns which has historically been served with dentists, because they want to kind of, their whole socioeconomic fabric is in the city, right? And so people are getting married later in life, they're having children later in life, and so that traditional model of going, having your dental practice, having a nice life, driving to your office, having free parking, right? And being able to afford a home a lot easier than you can in the city. A little bit of that's been lost. And so I think the advantage of models like what Weston is running, or what we're running, is that you're bringing those dentists into those marketplaces. You're giving them an opportunity to share in the upside, and to create a lifestyle for them that they can't have working in the city, right? It's a phenomenon. We talk about it very much, but people in the secondary markets and the tertiary markets, they need good dental care. And so without things like we're doing, or what Weston is doing, you're going to have this continued lack of services, and everyone's going to be driving to the cities, right? And so that creates a fundamental problem. So we're working really hard on that, and I think the recruiting is fundamental to that as well, and how you can back yourself down into the areas where you need to find your recruits. So everything from vocational schools or community colleges for dental assistants and hygienists, all the way through the university. So you're finding the dentists are coming out, and once you have them, how do you continue to make them better at their art, right? So it has to be a continuum. It has to be a multi-generational type of model, and you have to work towards it. So it's very difficult to be short-term, nearsighted on your model as you build these things, because if we're doing it right, we're actually helping dentistry and helping patients over time. So it's a little tricky, right? That's why I think those models early on in 21 and 22 really were misguided, because they were kind of short-term thinking in nature, and you can see ultimately what happened to them, right?
Yeah, fascinating discussion so far. Absolutely flying through time here, just to hear both your perspectives. Two very different markets, but quite aligned in some of your thinking. Last question, Weston. I'd love to go to you first for this. I feel like I've got a good idea on where you both will be coming from with this one, but I could be wrong. Obviously, dentist executives mixed feelings on the role of private equity in dentistry. Can be quite a contentious issue, not even outside of dentistry in the wider healthcare field. But for you, Weston, how do you see the involvement of private equity shaping the trajectory of DSO consolidation for the future?
It certainly is not going to be ignored because one of the things that's priming private equity to play in the dental space is what normal private equity incentives are, or what they're usually looking for, and dentistry checks a lot of those boxes. So we usually talk about the why, like, because partners will ask, like, well, what about private equity? Are they involved with you yet? Is that something you guys want to do? And then we want to explain, like, hey, well, here's why they're out there doing it. They're looking for an industry. They love healthcare, for one. They're looking for industries that are somewhat recession resistant. And while, we've dealt with recessions, dentistry is still here, and it comes out of recessions pretty quick and really well. High margins, right? Doesn't have to be geographically centric, right? You could manage multiples, in a lot of different locations. There's different regulations in different states, but once you kind of learn that, it's doable. And one of the most important things in this, and COVID was a really good example of this, and this is why it becomes so much more, is you can't really regulate dentistry out of existence. You can regulate it some, and there's frustrations as being a dentist, but it's not going to go away, really, right? And I actually jokingly made that comment. I just built an office in 2020, brand new office, right before COVID, and I made the joke with my partners, like, well, it's a good thing there's never been a time in dentistry when dentistry went to zero, because, like, I need it to be busy. And then the next month I shut my office for a month and a half, right? But what we came out of that, right, just like everybody skyrocketed out of COVID. And so it's very resilient. And then ultimately, there's a lot of built-in inefficiencies in dentistry. Classic traditional private practice is, 4 to maybe 9 team members, and you're doing everything yourself. You're running everything yourself. You're managing it all yourself. And like, you're having to wear so many hats, right? That is why private equity can come in, sees all that, and says, we can build on this, we can support all this, we have the money to back it up. And like I said earlier, there's a ton of it on the sideline ready to be deployed. Like, some of it's been sitting there for a long, long, long time, just waiting. And so I always try to help partners to understand that, like, hey, just like no dentist is alike, not all private equity is exactly the same, right? There are good groups out there who want to deploy good money for maybe a short period of time and maybe a long period of time. So depending on where your group's at and what you want to accomplish, there's private equity for those different levels and different times, and different amounts of equity that they want to buy into your group for, right? So I try not to paint a broad stroke over private equity being a bad thing for the industry, when really, if dentists are pushing that direction, then what they really need is the right kind of groups around them to help them navigate that, right? Because you can't just go from a single dentist straight to get good money in private equity on your own. There's going to be kind of a launch pad somewhere in the middle there. And that's where a lot of these hybrid groups, I think, do a good job of having a landing place for those partners who get where the industry is going. They want to participate in that value. And yes, private equity is going to probably provide some of the biggest amount of that value for it. But it's also not something we should be completely afraid of, because there are really good people out there who are looking for the right types of groups to work with, who are doing it for the right reasons. And Robert would probably say the same thing. If you're patient-centric and you're successful being patient-centric, then you've got a good model that's going to be continuous, and they're going to want to invest in you for that.
Bob, not all DSOs are the same. Not all private equity is the same.
No, there's 8,000 private equity firms, right, in the United States. They got $2 trillion of capital to deploy, and that's before you leverage it. So there's, $4 or $5 trillion. But they are smart individuals who are managing money for endowments and universities and pension funds and high net worth individuals. So they're not just putting out money without thinking about it. And so what Weston says is right. Dentistry has a good consistency over time and has some resiliency. And dentistry is only 20-25% consolidated. So they like the fact that there could be more rapid growth through consolidation, up to about 50% of consolidation. After then, they begin to lose interest, because that rapid growth that goes to kind of higher valuation multiples begins to wane. So there's a period here, call it the golden era for dentistry, that people could be taking advantage of. The positive of private equity really is that they're bringing capital into an industry that needs it, right? So whether it is new equipment, a new plant and facility, whether it's new ways of thinking about something, whether it's deploying new technologies, they're kind of helpful in that regard, and they bring the capital there. We all know dentists who've hung on to the same piece of equipment for years because they don't want to spend the $45,000 on a new CBCT, right? Well, the practice calls for that, but that needs to be invested in. That's not a big reach for private equity. So there's a lot of positives to private equity kind of coming in. 30% of corporate America is owned by private equity. So it's here. It will continue to be here. Dentistry has an issue, though, that they need to kind of perform in these corporate models better than they are, or else private equity is going to look at it and go, hey, interesting industry, really hard to roll it up, really hard to make consistency of cash flow, really hard to exit. And we're too young in the kind of the roll-up of dentistry to kind of see how it ultimately plays out. So, it's really kind of a call of caution or call to action for those who are running these firms. Please be sure you know what you're doing when you're running your DSO or DPO, right? Make sure you know that there's industrial logic to your investments or who you're buying, because at the end of the day, investors are watching and they want successful outcomes, right? And so, focusing on the patient, doing the right things from industrial logic, your value will accrete up and more money will flow in. We have another 23, 24 time period, money's going to leave the industry, right? And that's not a positive thing. And we've seen this in other industries. So that's kind of the cautionary tale on everyone is, that irrational exuberance, we can't go back there. We really can't. We've had one kind of stub your toe moment. We don't need to have another. And so, as we talked earlier about M&A picking up, hopefully in 2025, we all have to caution ourselves and steel ourselves and be disciplined in how we're going to do it. Because there are stakeholders out there watching intently, some who would like to come jumping in. Some of that $2 trillion needs to kind of come back in. But if we don't show that we can manage this sector well, it won't come in.
Yeah, I think Bob, Weston, fascinating, especially kind of to get both your insights on the private equity question there at the end. We've covered quite a lot of ground here in a relatively short amount of time, but before we round out the discussion, I'd love to just get maybe a 60-second takeaway from each of you. Could be something we referenced earlier on, maybe something we didn't quite get to. If there's a 30-second, 60-second takeaway I'd like to leave the audience members with today when we think about the next 5 years of DSO consolidation, what might that be? We'd love to go to you first, then Weston, take us on.
Yeah, just the fact that we kind of talked about differences between and what's happening in the changes in the industry here, and the fact that no DSOs are alike. There are different models out there. It is important if a partner is looking to join a group to really educate themselves on the different types of models. And we talk to partners nowadays who are talking to multiples at the same time, and that's really good to kind of get a different take and really understand, where the incentive of the group and where that doctor can be aligned, right? Again, the traditional route is, oftentimes a lot of buyout up front. So there is kind of some payout up front with maybe a little holding on to the second bite of the apple. And what we've tried to do is kind of flip that a little bit, right? Where dentist is holding on to the majority ownership of their practice. We're partnership for a minority stake at this point. And as we grow, then they have the opportunities to take chips off the table along the way as we grow together. And so there's a lot of different versions out there. And it sounds like that's kind of the direction Robert's going to, where it's, again, if we can get, buy-in from our doctors and our operators to be there and help us transition to Gen 2, and then have a successful transition through there long term, not just, hey, let's accumulate EBITDA and try to get out of here, then that's where we're going to see successful groups continue to move forward and like I said, what Robert said, prove that the industry can support, the kind of investments that are going to be happening real soon with it. So I'm really excited about it. Like I said, positive things to say about it. I've been involved in group dentistry now, and I'm proud to say I am. That's the thing. Like before, I was so anti, and now being on the other side of it and seeing how you can leverage a group to be successful in your practice on a day-to-day basis, I'm absolutely all for it, right? And so you just have to look for the right group that's willing to support you in your way. And I think it's important for you to seek that out as opposed to just assume the biggest deal up front is going to be the best one for you.
Yeah, I don't know Weston at all other than today, but I love him already because all the things that he's talking about are spot on. And I think the way to summarize it would be, both sides of the equation have to be discerning, right? So if you are running one of these organizations and you are focused on the patient, you got to be thoughtful on the partners you bring in, right? On the other side, if you're a dentist and you're thinking about models, try them all out, become a good consumer. And, the short dollar today may be a lot bigger tomorrow. You got to listen and understand. And more importantly, what do you want to work under? Right. And that's how we got involved. And it was just people didn't like the models people were working under. And so we came up with something a heck of a lot better. It sounds like Weston did too. So be a discerning seller, be a discerning buyer, and understand what we're all trying to do is ultimately create something that's better for patients and for dentistry as a whole, because this thing has to keep going for generations, right? It's not near term. I get out and I get to go. Whether you're an owner and and you sell and you want to go play golf in Florida, or you are running one of these and you ultimately want to sell out, you have to build something sustainable and something's going to last. That's what we look for. And that's why, quite honestly, when we look at partners, they're almost always referred by our existing partners. We have very little outreach. We're in fact very discreet on what we do, but we have a long kind of buy-in process, meaning, we get to know who's joining us really, really well. The partners sit down, and then the person who's going to join us, they have a lot of time to come and ask us questions, right? So we call it a process, not an event. Right? Try to make this a process, not an event. So you ultimately are happy with the decisions that you're making. And there are very good models out there that are much different than what the historical landscape of models would suggest.
Excellent. Food for thought there and some great final takeaways to round out our discussion today. Weston, Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you and your organizations a little bit more. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to speak with us today. And thank you so much to our audience members for being a part of our Becker's Dental and DSO virtual event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Thanks, Alan.
You too, Weston.